How exactly do you review something like The Legend of Zelda? It's a question I've asked myself multiple times while creating this video, and it's exactly what I hope to answer with this video series. Welcome to Revisiting the Classics, where I'll give you the history of a classic video game as well as talk about the influence it's had on the industry as a whole, and whether or not it's still fun to play to this day. So let's start with the game that started it all, The Legend of Zelda. And when I say it started it all, I couldn't mean it more literally. The influence this game had, and still has on the industry as a whole to this day, cannot be overstated. Pretty much every game post-1986 owes something to this game. Its open-ended exploration inspired the likes of Grand Theft Auto 3, which created the open-world genre. Its RPG and exploration elements served as the basis for Final Fantasy, which shaped the Japanese game market and Japanese role-playing games as a whole. It kickstarted the NES, which completely revitalized the home console market after the crash of 1980. Almost everything points back to this game. So what influenced and led to its creation? Well, to answer that question, we need to go all the way back to 1976 and a little game called Colossal Cave Adventure. Developed by William Crowther on a PDP-10 mainframe, the game set out to create a fun simulation of exploring the Mammoth Cave system in Kentucky that Crowther could play with his daughters. Unbeknownst to him, a young man named Don Woods would discover the game on a computer at Stanford University the following year. After contacting Crowther and receiving his blessing, Woods would add massive amounts of content to the game, including Tolkien-esque fantasy elements. This would be the version of the game that would catch the eyes of Ken and Roberta Williams in 1977. It was also during this year that unknown game designer Shigeru Miyamoto would be hired at Nintendo to help create board games after his expertise in toys impressed then-president Hiroshi Yamauchi. Around this same time, Nintendo had just released their first in a long line of dedicated home consoles, the Color TV game. Fast forward 2 years and Adventure is released on the Atari 2600. Adventure was created when Warren Robinett was tasked with creating a port of Colossal Cave Adventure to the 2600, a task thought impossible by upper management at Atari. Well, much to the surprise of everyone, including Robinett himself, the game was a smash hit, selling over 1 million copies. It would then go on to become the basis of the game we're discussing today. However, Adventure also had a significant influence on the industry as a whole that is not to be overlooked. The gameplay was incredibly basic and revolved around you, represented by this dot, getting this golden chalice to a castle and avoiding a dragon, represented by whatever this thing is. However simple it may be, the game was revolutionary at the time. It was the first game to use difficulty levels, random item locations, and even included the first Easter egg in a video game in the form of Robinett's name hidden in the game. Now fast forward to 1981. Ken and Roberta Williams, inspired by Colossal Cave Adventure, had gone on to form Sierra, and together had released Mystery House, the first graphical adventure game on PC. They were enjoying moderate success, but would go on to dominate the industry in 2 years' time with the release of King's Quest. In the time between the release of Adventure in 1981, the console gaming market had risen and fallen in the tremendous video game crash of 1980. Now arcades are where it's at, and the arcade scene was prime territory for a smash hit. Enter Shigeru Miyamoto. Miyamoto had been a creative person even during his childhood in the Kyoto prefecture of Japan. He spent much of his time in elementary school drawing cartoons and putting on puppet shows. He would later find his first creative love, drawing manga. In fact, he recalled in a later interview that he loved drawing manga so much he would often wish to have an illness that would leave him bedridden so he could draw manga all day. Now, after being hired at Nintendo, Miyamoto had cut his teeth making art for the arcade game Radar Scope. Nintendo tried to use this game to break into the North American arcade scene and failed miserably, leaving them with a huge amount of surplus cabinets. Miyamoto was then assigned the task of making Nintendo their big North American arcade hit out of repurposed Radar Scope machines. Originally, the game was supposed to be based on the Popeye cartoon to give it more appeal in the North American market, but negotiations for the license fell through, leaving Miyamoto with a bunch of Radar Scope cabinets and an idea for a game about a love triangle between two humans and an ape. Now we all know what happened from there. Donkey Kong became a massive success and catapulted Nintendo to the forefront of the gaming industry, subsequently causing Paramount to rethink their negotiations and allow Nintendo to develop a Popeye game. While that last bit isn't particularly important, the overwhelming success that Donkey Kong became is. Not only did it establish Shigeru Miyamoto as a key player in the industry, but it put money in the bank for Nintendo, which leads us to their attempt to revitalize the console gaming market in Japan in 1983 with the Nintendo Family Computer, or Famicom. It became a booming success. So much so that Nintendo was confident enough to release it in North America, even after the complete collapse the home console market had seen there only 6 years earlier. Nintendo needed a few things though. First off, they redesigned and rebranded the Famicom as the Nintendo Entertainment System, or NES. Now they needed some games to spearhead their massively ambitious console's launch. 2 games to be precise. So Nintendo assigned their 2 golden boys, Takashi Tezuka and Shigeru Miyamoto, the task of making 2 games that would be the polar opposite of each other for their new system, and thus Super Mario Bros. And The Legend of Zelda were born. In fact, The Legend of Zelda was also set to be the first release for the Famicom Disk System in Japan, an add-on to the Famicom that would allow it to play games off of floppy disks. In addition to the extra memory this disk system would provide, it also allowed for an extra music channel, which is why some of the music in the Japanese version of the game differs slightly. The original prototype of the game was actually built around one of the other new features of this system, the ability to write and rewrite data to the disks. Miyamoto thought that it would be fun for 2 players to design dungeons and then explore each other's creations. This early prototype went over resoundingly well with playtesters. At least the exploration of the dungeons did, not so much the designing. This led Miyamoto and Tezuka to settle on the idea of exploring a large overworld, complete with underground dungeons. Originally titled Adventure, Miyamoto stated that The Legend of Zelda would be inspired by his desire to explore caves nearby his house as a child, and would start the trend of Miyamoto designing games based on his everyday life. So while Tezuka was off writing the story and designing the setting for the game, Miyamoto was designing the mechanics. Now, seeing as this was such a new and experimental concept at the time, the game required extensive playtesting. Now, while I'm not one to hype up a single person's influence over a game or consider every piece of work they create a masterpiece simply on pedigree, what Miyamoto did next was nothing short of brilliant. When testers kept complaining that they were getting lost and confused in the game, instead of restructuring the game around focus groups as many modern developers would do, Miyamoto took their sword. This forced players to get into the proper exploration headspace he wanted them in after discovering the sword in the game's first cave. This sort of exploration and discovery design mindset would permeate itself through the rest of the game, for better or worse. This also led to Miyamoto working extensively to find the perfect balance of dungeons and exploring the overworld. Then, The Legend of Zelda released in 1986 and sold a mind-blowing 6.5 million units, and the rest is history. But now we come to the difficult question. Is the game still good? Ignoring the profound influence it has had on the industry as a whole and how revolutionary it was at the time, is the game still fun to play? Not really. At least not for me, but these kinds of things are subjective, so let me run through what I liked and didn't like. Now, keep in mind once again that I'm ignoring the influence the game had as well as the time it was released in. Basically, I'm going to review the game as if it had been released today on Steam or something. So first, the visuals. I'm not going to judge the technical execution based on the hardware, I'm purely looking at aesthetics. As far as characters in the game go, they're nothing fancy, but they work. Link, Moblins, Keese, and Octoroks are all immediately recognizable as what they are, which is sometimes a problem with older games. I'm glad to see Nintendo went with the simple but elegant solution rather than the fancy one, which wouldn't have aged as well. All of the areas in the overworld also have a distinct enough look or feel to them that they don't all run together, which is critical. However, I can't say that much for the dungeons. Many of the dungeons use too similar a palette and tile set to be visually distinct. The only thing that really differentiates these dungeons is the content within them and the area you enter the dungeon in. That's really all I have to say about the visuals, so let's move on to the sound. Now, I understand that the perfect marriage of technology and design can yield something great, but I also believe that limitations breed creativity and excellence. Nowhere is this more apparent than in Koji Kondo's score for this game. Working with the extremely limited technology available on the NES, he crafted some of the most memorable and catchy tracks in all of gaming. With 5 music channels, he accomplished what Skyward Sword couldn't do with an entire orchestra, actually be fun to listen to. A lot of that goes back to what I said about limitations breeding creativity. When you only have 5 channels of music to work with, you can't make complex interwoven instrumentation and melodies, so you have to rely on having a good beat and a simple catchy tune. This focus on rhythmic songs is why the score for this game is still not only relevant to fans, but still used as an inspiration for the scores of modern Zelda games by Nintendo. Sound effects are great as well. They're punchy and satisfying, and some of the series' most iconic sounds were created here. It's clear that even this early on, the development teams at Nintendo knew how to use the visuals and sounds to just make playing the game feel really good. Now let's talk about the story. It's pretty basic, and I'm sure most of you know it by heart at this point, so I'll run through it quick. Ganon and his army invade Hyrule and plunge it into chaos when they steal the Triforce of Power. In an attempt to keep Ganon from completing the Triforce, Princess Zelda shatters the Triforce of Wisdom into 8 pieces and scatters them throughout Hyrule before being kidnapped. As Link, the owner of the Triforce of Courage, you must track down these 8 shards, defeat Ganon, rescue the princess, and assemble the Triforce. Although you probably wouldn't know this without reading the manual or inferring it from context. I love this sort of indirect minimalistic storytelling, so bonus points there. The story itself is also simple and elegant, so bonus points there. So if all I've done so far is sing the game's praises, you might be wondering why I didn't enjoy my time with it. Well, now let's talk about the gameplay.
On the overworld, you basically run around doing side quests to improve Link's abilities as well as find the dungeons. This is where my first issue with the game comes into play. Miyamoto's explorative design mindset was something he was a little bullheaded about. This yielded great results in terms of world building. It really feels like you're discovering things in the game yourself rather than having a game designer lead you around by the nose. However, it also leads to some really obtuse and frustrating moments. For instance, to find one dungeon, you have to burn this one specific tree in a forest, full of trees. This makes it to where it's really not even possible to complete the game without a guide at this point, which takes away the feeling of exploration and discovery. So the game kind of shoots itself in the foot. As far as the gameplay in the dungeons, all of the combat is pretty good and finding your way through the dungeons is satisfying. My only problem is that it has been done much better by The Binding of Isaac, which is only dungeons and combat and it has random generation. So that's really all I have to say about the gameplay. There isn't much to it. So if you've played The Legend of Zelda recently, what did you think? Also, what did you think of this video? Would you like to see more in the future? Let us know in the comments, and until next time, peace.